When we grew up as kids, we used to have some small gardens near the basketball court in our backyard. They really only proved to be places for us to fall out of bounds when we were shooting a jump shot, or for us to be tackled as the sideline as we were playing football as kids. We always seemed to ruin the garden. So we didn't really have an issue when the zoysia grass seemed to creep in and take over that part of the yard, and the garden became just more of the football field. The gospel today is something beautiful. It's spoken to us because Jesus, the Master, says, how these weeds get in the midst of all of this grace, this blessing of new life in the garden. Where do these weeds come from? And one of the workers responds, the enemy has done this. Have you ever noticed that just when there's new life beginning to take part in an area of your life, you begin to notice some of the weeds? The weeds begin to try to snake their way through the new life, and they try to choke the new life that is being produced. And my immediate response sometimes is, let's go pull that weed up, because I don't want it to choke the new life, but the new life is so fragile that by pulling it up, it could actually destroy that new blossoming flower, that newly received virtue. Maybe the Lord allows the enemy, our weaknesses, to stay in the midst of the new virtue with the sole purpose, number one, to keep us humble and realize that virtue is a gift, it's a grace. Number two, to purify the gift, meaning to recognize that virtue, that gift, that grace is not just free, but it must be protected. And thirdly, to recognize that how fragile the gift is, and to understand that if I do not protect it and fortify it, meaning feed the virtue and cultivate the virtue, that enemy is going to come back, that vice is going to come and try to choke the virtue. For you and I, God does give to us on a regular basis beautiful virtues. He gives us these virtues with the sole intention that, yes, expect the enemy to come. But as we become more aware of the virtues, we become more aware of the enemy that seeks to choke the new life of Christ in each of us. If you and I receive a grace from the Lord, expect the enemy to come and try to steal it. Remember at the birth of Christ, as soon as the Christ child was born, Herod said, let's go kill the kid. As soon as a new virtue is born in the heart of a Christian, the enemy seeks to destroy it, because he doesn't want that fragile virtue to grow and blossom and to grow in from the mustard seed into one of the largest trees. So it's a confirmation that the virtue has been received when the enemy is aggressively coming after you in some area of your life. You may not recognize it right away, but there's a couple of things I think you should be aware of. Number one, when the enemy comes in, watch for oppression, that sadness, that weight, that inexplicable burden that you feel. And you feel like no one understands you, number one. Number two, that when you recognize the enemy is there, he begins to tell you that, you know what? You don't deserve the virtue. You don't deserve that blessing. Give it to somebody else. Or, number three, he'll tell you, this Christian life isn't all worth it. Why do you want to live like that? Just go back to your old ways, whatever they may be, and begins to dangle the past in front of you. The weed that comes in will show itself eventually. Be not afraid. But the last point is, when the weed shows itself, rejoice. Because when it's not shown, it's hard to attack it. It's hard to pull it up. But as soon as it shows itself, you know where to pull it up, and you know how to pull it up. And you should know what the roots look like. Don't just chop it off with a weed whacker and say, well, it's gone. You got to get in the trench and dig it up and dig it up. And that dog's going to come up by the roots. Otherwise, it's going to come back. Now, it's a lifetime challenge. But when you recognize that you pulled up something by the roots, there's such grace, there's peace. As we celebrate this week, can I encourage you, as you see virtues being cultivated in your heart of forgiveness, generosity, charity, patience, maybe even mercy, look for the enemy. Straight out, look for the enemy. And once you find the enemy, be at peace, because it means that virtue is getting so strong that Herod is manifesting his anger. But have total confidence, because that virtue will overcome that vice. We celebrate this week and go forth from here. Remember, Lord, help me to cultivate the virtues and to pull up the weeds of the vices in my life, but only with your grace. Remember, folks, it's more than a sermon. It's more than a thought. This is the reality of God's virtues in our lives. God bless you. Have a great week.